Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that one of America's most beloved restaurant brands is now one of its most disliked? How could a company that defined an era of dining fall so far so fast? The financial trajectory of Chipotle Mexican Grill, once the darling of the fast casual dining revolution, now serves as a stark warning about brand identity, consumer trust, and the unforgiving realities of a fractured economy. The company's current crisis is not a singular event, but a slow motion collapse, visible both on the Wall Street ticker and in the echoing silence of its once bustling dining rooms. The financial picture is bleak. Chipotle's stock has plummeted, falling nearly 50% from its recent peak and suffering one of its most severe single day drops in its history as a public company. This is not an isolated bad quarter. The company is now consistently missing Wall Street's demanding expectations, a pattern of failure that signals a deep seated disconnect between its strategic direction and the consumers it claims to serve. This crisis is not confined to spreadsheets and analyst calls. It is a tangible reality. On a recent Friday afternoon at 12:30, historically the absolute peak of the lunchtime rush, a Chipotle parking lot sat nearly empty, a scene that would have been unimaginable a decade ago. This anecdotal evidence is chillingly confirmed by the company's own metrics. Same store sales, the lifeblood of any retail chain, have declined by a staggering 5% year over year. The brand's perception, once built on a foundation of cult like devotion, is now in tatters. A cursory glance at customer reviews reveals a landscape of profound disappointment. Terrible reviews are the new norm, with many locations struggling to maintain a 3.5-star rating, a figure that is perilously low in the hyper competitive restaurant industry. Some locations have even descended into the abyss of 2.5-star ratings, a clear indicator of systemic operational failure. Perhaps most damning is the data on brand loyalty. The Net Promoter Score, or NPS, a metric that measures how likely customers are to recommend a brand to others, reveals the full extent of the brand's decay. Chipotle currently holds an NPS of a dismal 17. To put this in perspective, this is less than half the industry average. It is utterly eclipsed by competitors like In-N-Out Burger, which boasts a score of 63. This numerical chasm represents a fundamental breakdown of trust. Chipotle is no longer a brand people champion. It is a brand they actively warn their friends and family to avoid. To understand the depth of this fall, one must first revisit the dizzying heights of its ascent. The Chipotle story begins in 1993, not as a grand vision for a global empire, but as a pragmatic stepping stone. Steve Ells, a classically trained chef, borrowed a modest $1,000 from his parents. His ambition was not to revolutionize fast food, it was to use the profits from a small burrito shop to eventually fund his true dream, a fine dining establishment. The concept he deployed, however, proved to be revolutionary. Ells applied the rigorous techniques and ethos of his fine dining background to a fast food footprint. This was a radical departure from the industry standard. While McDonald's and its peers built empires on prepackaged, frozen, and highly processed ingredients, Ells built his menu around fresh food, complex recipes, and in house preparation. He rejected the freezer and the microwave in favor of the grill and the knife. A problem quickly emerged for Ells's fine dining aspirations. His fast food concept was a runaway success. Customers, starved for an option that was both quick and high quality, embraced the fresh, flavorful, and transparent model. The dream of a different restaurant went by the wayside as the demand for Chipotle exploded. This growth was initially managed by a relentless focus on simplicity. Els kept the menu and recipes simple and replicable, allowing the chain to expand without diluting the core product. The concept's potential soon attracted a titan. In 1998, McDonald's, the very symbol of the industrial food system Chipotle was defined against, invested a massive $360 million in the burgeoning chain. Els, in a move of strategic brilliance, did not allow the corporate giant to assimilate his brand. Instead, he leveraged McDonald's unparalleled expertise in real estate and supply chain scalability. This partnership was the jet fuel for Chipotle's growth, transforming the company from a small chain of 16 locations in 1998 to a formidable network of over 500 by 2005, when Chipotle went public with its initial public offering in 2006. It was a sensation. The brand had achieved a cult like peak. Its identity was perfectly aligned with the growing cultural demand for transparency and real food. Customers loved the open kitchens where they could watch their meal being prepared, a stark contrast to the opaque factory feel of traditional fast food. This was more than a restaurant, it was a lifestyle choice. This authentic customer devotion translated into an almost unbelievable business advantage. The product was the advertising. The chain spent a mere 1.5% of its total revenue on advertising, an amount that was an order of magnitude lower than what its competitors spent just to get in the door. Word of mouth was so powerful that paid marketing was almost unnecessary. By 2015, the company was riding a tidal wave of success. Revenue had swelled from $1.8 billion in 2010 to over $4 billion. The machine was so finely tuned that Chipotle was opening a new restaurant nearly every 2 days. It seemed for a time that the company could do no wrong. But within the DNA of Chipotle's success lay an inherent catastrophic weakness. The very fresh food model that built the brand, the rejection of preservatives, the reliance on decentralized kitchens, the use of fresh, raw produce, also made it uniquely vulnerable. The thing that made Chipotle special was the thing that would come to nearly destroy it. By 2015, the chain had grown so large so quickly that it had outgrown its own ability to keep its complex fresh food supply chain safe. In 2015, the nightmare scenario arrived. A series of widespread, high profile health outbreaks, including E. coli and salmonella, sickened hundreds of customers across the country. The brand built on food with integrity was suddenly the face of a food safety crisis. The immediate aftermath was brutal. The stock, once a Wall Street darling, went into free fall, shedding over 20% of its value in a matter of weeks. More visibly, the famously long lines that snaked out the doors of its restaurants, the most potent symbol of its success, vanished. Customers were quite simply afraid to eat the food. The fallout from this crisis was not a temporary dip, it was a protracted and agonizing decline. In 2016, Chipotle experienced its first ever revenue decline in its history as a public company, a staggering loss of over $600 million in sales in that year alone. The legal and financial repercussions culminated in a $25 million fine for foodborne illnesses, the largest such fine in history. The brand was toxic. By 2017, the board had forced a complete regime change. The co-CEO structure was dismantled, and founder Steve Ells himself was pushed out. The era of the chef-led, food-focused Chipotle was officially over. Desperate to salvage the sinking ship, the board looked for a new leader not from the world of fine dining, but from the world of mass market fast food. They hired Brian Niccol from Taco Bell, a man famed not for his culinary expertise, but for his marketing savvy as the architect of the Doritos Locos Tacos. Niccol's mandate was clear: fix the safety issues, stabilize the brand, and make it profitable again. He immediately implemented a three-pronged strategy that would become known as the Taco Bell playbook. First, Nicole aggressively dragged Chipotle into the 21st century. He rolled out a robust online ordering system, a functional mobile app, and lucrative delivery partnerships. This was a necessary modernization that the previous leadership had stubbornly resisted. Second, he addressed the food safety crisis head on by implementing factory level standardization and safety measures, borrowing heavily from the centralized systems used at McDonald's and his former employer, Taco Bell. The food was undeniably safer, but as a direct consequence, many customers noted it was also not quite as fresh. The trade off had begun. Third, Niccol abandoned the brand's reliance on word of mouth. He initiated traditional marketing campaigns, rotating promotions, and new menu items designed to create buzz and compete directly with a new generation of fast casual competitors like Cava that had copied Chipotle's original model. Niccol's timing, combined with pure luck, proved impeccable. The technology and off premise systems he implemented between 2018 and 2019 were perfectly positioned for the COVID-19 pandemic that arrived in 2020. As the world shut down, Chipotle's business seamlessly pivoted. Over 60% of its sales shifted to takeout and delivery. The turnaround was a spectacular financial success. By 2023, the stock had rebounded by an incredible 700%. Profits had grown in lockstep by 700%, and revenue had doubled. On paper, Brian Niccol had engineered one of the greatest comebacks in corporate history. But this victory concealed a profound, self inflicted wound. The focus on profitability and operational efficiency, the Taco Bell playbook, had succeeded financially by killing the very soul of the brand. The second fall of Chipotle was not a sudden crisis, but a deliberate strategic choice. The company had systematically destroyed its original value proposition. The first and most obvious assault was on price. A single burrito, once an affordable luxury, now costs between $11 and $14 in many markets. A full meal with the obligatory chips, guacamole, and a drink can easily approach $20. This was no longer fast casual pricing. It was a full throated leap into the casual dining price bracket without the corresponding service or experience. Worse than the price hikes, however, was the betrayal of shrinkflation. Customers online began complaining for years, posting photos of comically small scoops and half empty burrito bowls. It was not just their imagination. The company eventually admitted that a shocking 10% of its restaurants were actively skimping on ingredients, using smaller scoops of protein, less rice, less of everything in a widespread grassroots effort to maximize profits at the store level. Customers noticed. They were being asked to pay more for demonstrably less. This was a fundamental violation of the brand's core promise of abundant, high quality food. Finally, the atmosphere died. The welcoming, bustling, slightly chaotic feel of the original Chipotle was replaced by the impersonality of a McDonald's. The focus on digital throughput meant that in store customers were often ignored in favor of a churning assembly line of online orders. Customers were no longer guests, they were just a name and a number on a ticket. This shift was cemented by a stunning display of strategic arrogance. When pressed on the collapsing value proposition, CEO Scott Boatwright was unflinching, stating clearly value as a price point is not and will not be a Chipotle strategy. The company's attempts to gesture at value have been perceived as hollow and insulting. A limited time promotion offering a discount for wearing a costume on Halloween, for example, is a marketing gimmick, not a sustainable value proposition. Similarly, a build your own catering offer starting at $60, which breaks down to $15 per person before drinks, is not a deal. It is simply a repackaging of their already expensive catering menu. This internal brand decay is now colliding with a brutal macroeconomic storm, and Chipotle is caught directly in the eye of it. The company's own leadership has been forced to sound the alarm. CEO Scott Boatwright admitted in a recent call that the consumer slowdown is really affecting our business in a meaningful way. He reported a sizable step down in visits from consumers earning under $100,000 a year, a demographic that critically makes up 40% of Chipotle's entire customer base. Even more troubling, Boatwright identified a massive pullback from the brand's core audience, consumers aged 25 to 34. This is the very group of millennials and Gen Z that built the brand. The reason for their retreat is no mystery. Chipotle's leadership noted this demographic is particularly challenged by a toxic cocktail of unemployment, the recent resumption of student loan repayments, and paycheck shrinkage, as slower real wage growth fails to keep pace with inflation. Chipotle's struggles are a microcosm of a much larger economic malaise. This is not a problem unique to one burrito chain. The CEO of Kraft Heinz, a staple of the American grocery aisle, reported one of the worst consumer sentiments we have seen in decades. This sentiment is backed by hard data. The Conference Board, which tracks consumer confidence, shows that holiday spending plans are falling, with consumers planning to spend 3.9% less on gifts and a shocking 12% less on non gift items. This pullback is exacerbated by external shocks, such as a recent government shutdown that instantly froze the spending power of 1.5 million federal employees. All of this is happening while consumers are already stretched thin, buried under record high credit card balances, and crushed by soaring rent and insurance costs. Nothing encapsulates this complete collapse of value better than a micro level analysis of a single product, the quesadilla. This item, in a perfect summary of the nickel era, is often an online only order, a product engineered for digital throughput rather than in store experience. But the quesadilla itself is a tragic paradox. On one hand, its design is a work of minor genius, a nod to the food first innovation that once defined the brand. On the other, its execution is a cynical betrayal of that design, representing everything the company has become. The brilliance of the design, as noted by food enthusiasts, is that it solves the two fundamental flaws of a traditional quesadilla. First, instead of a simple half moon fold, the Chipotle version uses a square fold, meticulously folding the edges of the large tortilla inward. This creates a perfectly sealed pocket with no open edges. The genius of this is structural. It allows the quesadilla to be loaded with cheese and meat without the contents spilling out during the cooking or eating process. It transforms a messy, flimsy item into a robust, self contained food parcel. This is the kind of thoughtful, customer centric engineering that built the original Chipotle's reputation. The second clever component is the eating experience. Because the square form factor is so stable, it can be cut in half and used for dipping. The company serves it with salsa, sour cream, and guacamole on the side, and the quesadilla halves hold together perfectly, acting as a clean, controlled vehicle for the sauces. It is, in short, built to dip. This is not just a food item, it is a complete, well designed system. This is the ghost of the old Chipotle, a company that cared about how its food was experienced. Now, contrast this design genius with the modern day reality, a reality defined by the Taco Bell playbook. The cost for this item, a beef barbacoa quesadilla with a side of guacamole, is a staggering $15.75. The product the customer receives is a hollow shell, a betrayal of the design's promise. In a direct comparison, the store bought item weighed in at a mere 220 grams. It was described as tortilla forward, a damning critique, meaning the most prominent ingredient was the cheapest one. The skimping was not a bug, it was the feature. When this product was recreated at home using the same brilliant square fold technique, the results were devastating. The total grocery bill for 6 homemade quesadillas was $47.64, making the per serving cost just $7.94, almost exactly half the price. More importantly, the homemade version, loaded with the abundant meat and cheese that the design implies, weighed in at 280 grams, significantly heavier and more satisfying than the official product. The homemade version fulfilled the promise of the design. The Chipotle version was a cynical, expensive facsimile. This single quesadilla is the perfect metaphor for the entire company. The nickel strategy kept the architecture of the brand, a fresh ish concept, a cool online only item, but gutted its substance, the value, the abundance, the quality to maximize efficiency and profit. The customer is left holding a brilliantly designed, structurally sound, and deeply disappointing product, paying a premium price for a hollowed out experience. This is the skimflation and value collapse in its most tangible, edible form. Ultimately, Chipotle's story is a perfect illustration of the K shaped economy. There is an upper leg where tech companies like Amazon and Google post record profits and pour billions into artificial intelligence, their stock prices soaring. And there is a lower leg where consumer facing companies like Chipotle, McDonald's, and Kraft Heinz all issue dire warnings about severe and worsening consumer strain. This creates the vibe-cession disconnect. The mainstream narrative, fueled by a strong stock market and lauded by politicians, is that the economy is booming. But for millions of Americans, particularly the younger generations that form Chipotle's core base, this narrative is a cruel joke. They are told the economy is great, yet they are struggling to afford rent, student loans, and a $14 burrito. This profound disconnect between the official story and lived reality is fueling deep seated frustration and a desperate search for alternatives. If this is the best a booming free market can provide, they reason, then perhaps the alternatives are worth considering. The final analysis of Chipotle is one of a perfect storm. It is a company that fell victim to its own self inflicted wounds, arrogance, price hikes, shrinkflation, and a fundamental loss of its brand identity. This internal decay then collided with a harsh macroeconomic reality that is disproportionately crushing its most loyal customers. Chipotle is not just a failing restaurant chain, it is a monument to a broken value proposition and a warning sign for an economy that is leaving its next generation behind. The company priced itself out of reach for the very people who built the brand.